We are live at the Sandbox Art First Gallery here in Paris, and I'm here with Ben Elvidge, Head of Commercial Application at Trilitech.
Hi, nice to be here.
How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm great, thank you. It's been a long first day yesterday, but it's going to be great. It was going to be a great week, so I'm very excited.
I'm excited. Have you been to Paris Blockchain Week before?
I haven't. This is my first time at Paris Blockchain Week, I'm sad to say.
Okay, well, I'm sure it's going to be absolutely incredible. Let's start off this interview by hearing a little bit more about your background.
Sure. So, look, my background predominantly is TradFi, right? So I did a long stint at Morgan Stanley. Before that, I was a consultant for financial institutions, predominantly in the investment space, and was figuring out what to do after spending some time in fintech last year, for 3 years, and then last year came across this project through someone in my network, and was just super excited about the Uranium project, and here we are. So it's almost been a year actually. So we did that last year. We launched in December, and I took the leap to join full-time Trilitech and sort of push this forward, and we're excited about what this can become.
Wow, okay, and so what's your role at Uranium.io?
Yeah, so I'm the product lead for Uranium.io. The original construct was to do some other stuff as well, but we're just so excited by what Uranium can be that it's sort of become a full-time job for me, and we're starting to look at some other RWAs that can use this blueprint as well. I'm sure we'll get into that as we go through the conversation.
So as we get into it, give us the elevator pitch of what is Uranium.io.
Yeah, so in short, Uranium.io is an ability for anyone to buy physical uranium. So we have looked at uranium as an interesting market because it was something that only traded OTC, but it's super critical to energy security and everything that we want to do in the world globally. When I say everything, I mean everything, because it's about energy fundamentally. But you couldn't get access to it. Typically, it trades in sort of $6 million clip sizes. And so actually what we thought was this is a really cool thing to give people access to. It doesn't have much correlation with other assets. So in short, it's a blockchain based, built on Etherlink, which is the layer 2 EVM from Tezos. It's a blockchain based platform that enables you to buy and sell physical uranium.
Wow, that is super, super exciting. And so why do you think that uranium was one of the first tokenized real world assets?
Yeah, I think I touched on a few points of it, but I think, the nature of the market and the barriers to entry in the market, there was a real opportunity for uplift by putting it on chain. Also, the asset itself historically has performed very well. So it's outperformed the S&P 500 up until the end of March. And the 5 years prior, obviously not financial advice, and it might not do that again, but that's interesting. But more importantly, certainly as we look at some of the macro trends that are going on around AI, and we saw Microsoft reopening 3 Mile Island. Nuclear energy is crucial. Moving away from more of a globalized world, energy security is important. So the macro tailwinds are really strong. And actually, unlike other RWAs, it's quite aligned to the Web3 audience, right? Talking to someone about holding T-bills is much less interesting than talking to someone about holding uranium. And so I think actually there's a much better alignment of interest with the Web3 audience, as well as all of those characteristics, making sure it's relevant for growing the audience that's using blockchain technology to invest in these assets. So it's relevant for TradFi folks too. What's
the real pain point of that Uranium.io is solving though?
Yeah, so I think, if we look at the original uranium or the uranium market before we launched Uranium.io as a venue, really, there's a few key points that we solve. One is the high entry to kind of the high entry barriers. So, $6 million, $3 million if you've got a friendly broker, minimum capital sizes. It's all traded OTC. So, you need a broker to be able to do that. So the market is quite illiquid. And it's all very archaic. So physical settlement can take anywhere. If you've got a converter account, so you need an account with one of 3 converters globally. So there's one in Canada, one in the US, and one in France.
What's a converter?
So a converter is essentially the guys that once the uranium is dug up out of the ground, they store the uranium and they enrich that uranium to be used in nuclear fuel. So it can only be uranium can only be stored with one of these 3 converters outside of in the Western world, outside of Russia. So that's kind of a big barrier to entry as well. So not only do you have to have millions of dollars, not only do you need to get a fair price, but then you also need to be able to pass all of the operational burdens to kind of get that access to the physical underlying. There are other ETF products out there, but historically they've traded at quite a large discount to the actual value. So blockchain solves all of that, right? In terms of we move into instant settlement through uranium.io. All you need is an email address and a wallet address, EVM-compatible wallet address, and you can go on there and buy uranium.
Wow.
And you know, you don't need a converter account. You can just hold it physically in your wallet. And then if you were able to take physical redemption and you did have a converter account, you actually could set instructors to burn those tokens, and you could take physical delivery in your converter account.
And you can take actual physical delivery of the uranium?
Yeah, so within reason, right? So it's not like you can take a truck and back up a truck to Cameco in Canada and say, give me my uranium. But you can, if you've got a Cameco account, say, actually burn my tokens and give me the actual uranium amount into my account.
Wow. And I'm just curious from an investment standpoint, what do you think the upside is in owning or investing in uranium? Yeah,
so very conscious that this is not financial advice, but you know, in terms of upside and why we're interested by this is really already there's already a demand and supply gap, right? So for example, last year there was about demand with the existing fleet of nuclear reactors for 194 million pounds of uranium. Mm-hmm. Only 155 million pounds was dug up out of the ground. So already there's a supply and demand deficiency. So that makes it really interesting because you think prices should increase. But it makes it really interesting as well from a macro tailwinds perspective. We talked about AI just a second ago. So energy demands are ever increasing as we bring more things online, not just AI, but predominantly driven by the compute required from AI. Energy security is super important. We see with the tariffs and everything else that's going on that people want kind of greater national energy security and security of assets more generally. So we think nuclear energy is something that solves that problem. So again, while there's already a supply and demand gap, we think that gap's going to get even bigger. I think the other interesting piece why people should own it is we've done our own analysis over the last 5 years, and actually it's almost completely uncorrelated negatively or positively with Bitcoin, with the S&P 500, with gold and with oil.
Negatively correlated.
So there's no correlation. So it shows it bears no correlation at all. So actually from a portfolio diversification perspective, if I lean into my TradFi roots, it seems like it's a great asset to be able to own. And more than anything, it's something that historically only institutions have been able to access, or you can access a suboptimal product in the ETF.
Right.
So bringing it on chain fulfills that sort of primary use case in my mind of why blockchain exists, which is to provide greater access to more people,
to everyone,
and get everyone involved in having the advantages that historically were only reserved for the few.
I love that. Okay, so I would imagine that running an operation like this from the tech side, especially, this isn't simple.
No, it isn't. And look, we're fortunate that we've got a great team around us that, you know, are all within the Tezos ecosystem. As I mentioned, this has been built and launched on Etherlink, which is the EVM-compatible layer 2 from Tezos. So that gives us a great foundation, you know, sub-second block times, very low gas fees, which is great for doing something like this. But you're right, in terms of the broader operational and process-based aspects, that's been a lot of learning. So the project, so as I mentioned, I joined a year ago now. It's a year next week, which is scary. But it was already 2 years in the making before that, because there's a lot of legal and regulatory aspects to think about how you bridge that. There's also a lot of process pieces, right? As I mentioned, settlement in the converter world, in the offline world or off-chain world, is sort of between five days and 2 weeks. So actually, how do you bridge that gap when you're looking to offer near-time settlement? So we've had to do a lot of work around aligning processes, working with great partners, both in the physical uranium space, so Curzon Uranium, who are an OTC broker. For physical uranium, they've been a key partner, but then also working with established partners like Archax in the UK, who are FCA regulated, to do the tokenization and be the trustee. And then our lawyers have done a phenomenal job in terms of the structure itself, because what's really different about this structure to other RWA projects is there is no SPV layer. So we're not tokenizing an SPV. Yes, we bought physical uranium, we tokenized that, but we're using a trust framework in the UK that enables actual token holders to own the beneficial, which then means they can take that physical delivery if they redeem their tokens. which is pretty unusual from a lot of other RWA projects out there.
Yeah. How does it compare to other RWA projects?
Yeah, so in many cases, certainly in the early phases of tokenization, a lot of the time it was buy the assets, put those into an SPV and tokenize the shares of the SPV, right? And that made it really easy to tokenize, and it was clear, but were you in the scope of securities law or not? So this is a world away from that part in terms of putting an SPV in the middle. So there's no layers in the middle. There's just a trustee, which is our checks, and then the physical underlying, and then you as the token holder, which essentially you are the beneficial owner. So as I mentioned before, if you want to take physical, and that's super important, right? So what that means is we're actually delivering a real world use case that doesn't happen without the physical delivery.
Wow. No, absolutely. Very, very cool. So tell me, let's get into the tech a little bit.
Yeah.
What separates your tech from other companies?
Yeah. So I think the regulatory piece is a big part of that, but certainly from a tech perspective, I work for Trilitech, and the project's been incubated within Trilitech. So we are part of the Tezos ecosystem. So all of that good stuff about, robustness and scalability, and the on-chain governance has transferred over to the layer 2 in Etherlink. But what's great about Etherlink is, as I said, it's really two main things that like any financial product, I would argue, needs to have is low costs and fast transaction times. And certainly when you look at what we're trying to do in Uranium, we want those really low block times, because that enables us to create more liquidity and actually give a real price for this critical asset. So in terms of the tech, we built on Etherlink, which is again, just to reiterate, the layer 2, EVM-compatible layer 2 from Tezos, or within the Tezos ecosystem. And quite frankly, it's been pretty phenomenal for what we've wanted to do. And, we kind of are excited about scaling this project even more.
I'm sure. So you are working at the intersection of TradFi, commodities, and blockchain.
Yeah.
That's, those are pretty sophisticated areas. What's that like?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, and it's something that I've been super passionate about being more involved in. So I think back to my days at Morgan Stanley, this is a world away from that. But, we never had any issues at Morgan Stanley in getting access to any assets, right? Someone can phone up somebody and get invested in an asset. So I think being able to then work in a space where we're bringing that to everyone and using technology to do that is great. I think in terms of learnings, this project goes to show that blockchain really can have an impact on what is a very, some might say, archaic process and system. Sophistication is really sort of DocuSign in this world right now in terms of the agreements, but everything happens on a phone or email OTC basis right now. And so actually what we found by doing this is that we can become the liquid venue for uranium, and that's our ambition. That's what we want to be, is the true price that is near real time, and that just not benefits everyone that's already in the ecosystem and financial investors, but it also helps those in the primary kind of use cases of nuclear. Right now, you've got to have a fair mark to market value. You've got to have reliable brokers that have got your interests at heart. Actually, when you put this on chain and make it a lit venue, actually you're benefiting everyone. And also because we get the liquidity into this venue, again, not to get too technical, but you also help those firms manage their risk. So actually what we hope is that we will become the primary venue for trading uranium. In addition, that also, because there is this liquidity and this price transparency in the venue, that we can actually then create more innovation around the nuclear and uranium industry and more people to participate, which is good for everyone. Again, going back to the macro tailwinds around why nuclear energy is so important.
Absolutely. What do you see the next 5 years looking like in terms of, I guess, uranium or tokenized uranium adoption?
Yeah, so I think it's very much about this. Certainly in the short term, it's about getting the word out there, and hence being here at Paris Blockchain Week, right? It's about meeting as many people as we can. I think we want to increase liquidity into the kind of the token as well, and the platform. And so, we've got to meet the market where it is to a certain extent. We'd love everyone to be on uranium.io right now, but looking at listings with centralized exchanges, continuing to build out partnerships with liquidity providers is crucial for delivering on that promise of providing that liquid venue. And in terms of the wider, longer term roadmap, we continue to look at other metals. We think what we've got from a blueprint perspective in terms of the way we've tokenized uranium can also apply to other metals. So whether that's lithium or cobalt, they share a lot of the similar characteristics in terms of trading OTC, no real lit venue for them. With high liquidity, and also they play into that theme around what are the things that are going to drive our society forwards. Not to get too sort of abstract about it, but EVs is a good example. We know that lithium is crucial to that. Mobile phones and smartphones will continue to be ubiquitous, and other types of tech that require things like cobalt. So playing into how do we improve and get better market infrastructure around these key transition metals or energy, rare earth metals is going to be crucial. And we think what we've got from a blueprint perspective, as we think sort of longer term, the uranium.io framework is something that we think we can apply and started to certainly have those conversations to do that kind of stuff.
Okay, because I was about to ask what's next for uranium.io.
So what's next for uranium.io? More of getting the word out like this. So sort of the education piece. As I said before, it's something that is, we believe, of interest, and certainly the feedback we've got is interesting for different audiences, right? We think it's very relevant for the institutional audience and giving them better access. Both TradFi and Web3. We think it's very relevant for individual investors in the Web3 and the TradFi space as well. So, but there is an education piece. When people haven't had access to an asset before, you need to tell them why it's something that they should be interested in having access to. So for uranium.io, it's very much about that education piece and getting people to try the platform. And it is super simple. It's, we've enhanced all of our KYC and on-chain analytics capabilities to streamline the onboarding. So actually now all you need is an email address and an EVM-compatible wallet. And you can go and sort of buy uranium. And from there, we do on-chain analytics in the background. We've got providers that support us, and we only then do KYC with the folks that get flagged. So we've made that process as simple as possible. So we'll continue to look at how we evolve that sort of stuff. But really, it's just driving adoption of uranium.io is the short and long-term goal, and making sure that, it does become the venue for trading uranium anywhere.
I'm wondering, just as you mentioned that, are there any regulatory kind of challenges that you guys are facing as you guys navigate that?
Yeah, so as I say, I think the reason it's taken so long to get to this point is, we've spent a lot of time both with our own legal team, external counsel, and with sort of our partners' legal teams to figure that out. And actually, we're really confident that, because it's important to remember that spot commodity trading, if you weren't doing it on chain, is not regulated. And so just because we're putting it on chain and making the transactions more efficient doesn't mean that it should be regulated. So from that perspective, we think we're clear. The trust framework has been super important. So we spent a lot of time there as well. The big regulatory piece, and everyone thinks about this when you talk about uranium, is that no one who shouldn't get access can get access to it, right? And so we do that in two ways. So as I said, we've got on-chain analytics and outsourced kind of providers that do the KYC and due diligence to make sure anyone that is closely related to sanctioned countries or wallets, we kind of stop them from holding it. So that's one piece. But then also, just to reiterate, you can't take physical delivery unless you've got a converter account. So the risk of you owning uranium and being able to do something wrong with that, like build a weapon, is very remote, because you have to have been able to get an account with the converter that would enrich that uranium for you and for you to take delivery. So actually, in some ways, I would say that the heavily regulated aspects around taking physical delivery have actually worked in our favor, because it creates that natural barrier.
Natural barrier to entry.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Ben, I think this has been incredible. I do have one final question.
Sure.
And that question is, if Einstein saw tokenized uranium today, what would you think?
I think that's a really good question. I think he would be impressed, I think, because I think he would be saying, actually, notwithstanding uranium and nuclear weapons, I think he saw the potential in nuclear. And so I think the fact that everyone can partake in that and benefit on the upside, but also create better transparency around that market, is something that I think he'd be quite happy with.
You'd be happy with?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, Ben, this has been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you very much for your time.
Hey, what's up? But it's not something you want to survive, you got to build a
How
hive.
did you know we did not understand that we did not understand?
Ladies and gentlemen,
Go back at the Genzio Media House.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today.